Hi guys, welcome to Bad King. When I first sat down to put together part 2 of our grenade tutorial, I realized that there's various different approaches that we could take when it comes to detailing and painting, and it really didn't seem fair for me to simply show you one way where I go in there and just paint and sculpt this thing up. I really wanted to dedicate part 2 of this tutorial to specific techniques, and not only that, I wanted to show you certain problems that you could potentially encounter when applying certain techniques and approaches. So let's do this. Let's actually focus on different methods which in my opinion are incredibly informative, and if you're a beginner or even an intermediate user with ZBrush, you'll find this stuff really helpful. So let's do that. Let's focus on various different painting and detailing techniques, and then we'll make a third tutorial where we go in there and sort of paint and detail this model out and take it into Photoshop for the final composite. So with that said, let's not waste any more time and let's get into it. Okay, let's start with the first step, which is adding a little bit of detail, and let's go to geometry, and let's have a look at our subdivisions. And mine's set at 3, your one's probably set at 4 if you followed along with my last tutorial. So I'm just going to double click on that, and I'm going to send this down to around about 2 in order to lower the detail of this. And the reason for that is that I'm going to show you the difference between the higher subdivisions and lower subdivisions when we apply noise through our deformation drop down. So we've got our deformation drop down, and down here we've got noise. We click on that and we type in 20, and we get something like this, which is cool. A little bit excessive, a little bit too much. You know, you probably have to find a happy medium between 20 and 0 in order to get what you want, but this could work if that's the look you're after. Personally, not really the look I'm after just yet, and we could, you know, go to our geometry and up our subdivisions and have a look what it looks like when our subdivisions are up higher. Still, you know, looks a bit waxy to me, probably because of our material. We'll go ahead and play around with the different material settings and RGB and mRGB and all that sort of stuff a bit later, but yeah, not quite right. So Control Z that out again, and let's up our subdivisions to around about 4. Let's close our geometry thingy drop down, and let's go back to noise and type in 20 again. This time around, you'll notice that it's really fine and it's not as coarse as the other one, and there's a lot more detail in there, but in my opinion, the size of the noise is way too small now, and it kind of looks fake. So that's not really what we're after, unless that's what you want. So, okay, so how do we combat this, and how do we get around this whole issue in regards to noise, and how do we get it chunky in some parts and not as chunky in other parts? Well, for that, I am going to introduce you to something called Surface. If we click on that, we get this really cool drop down. And in here we've got our noise button, so if I just click on that, you can sort of see a little bit of detail that kind of appears on this sort of pineapple cast iron body. If you can't really see it, you're probably, you know, watching a low resolution video of this. Switch over to HD, you could probably make it out a little better. And if we increase, say for instance, our scale size right here, you could probably see it a bit better. We also have controls in regards to how much strength we can apply. So, you know, if I go down and apply a little bit more strength, we can really make it look kind of hairy like that, which is not what we want. Okay, so, you know, they're just some of the options that you have available to you. You also have a noise curve editor, which is pretty darn cool, because if I click on that, I can make points and I can manipulate those points, as well as the other points that are available. Here I am manipulating my points, and you can sort of see how this is working out. I could kind of apply kind of like these deep sort of chunky sort of points to some parts and make it really smooth in others. And this curve editor is great, but it comes at a price, because great effects are never free. Once we hit apply, oh yeah, by the way, I should really explain this. If we turn the noise button off, you notice that our noise actually disappears. And the reason for that is we're not actually applying the noise to the geometry as yet. In order to actually apply the noise to the actual model or mesh or geometry or whatever you want to call it, we actually have to click this button called Apply to Mesh. We click on that, and that's when the funny stuff starts to happen. And by that I mean it looks, well, it kind of looks inflated and kind of fat. But that's okay, there's actually a way to combat this. What I recommend is you be a little conservative in regards to your settings. Now obviously, you know, my scale size is a bit much and my noise strength is a bit wonky, and then, you know, you take one look at my curve editor and you kind of can't help but to scratch your head and go, oh, what's going on there? So just be sensible. I actually hopped onto the Z Central forums to have a look if anybody else is having this issue, and apparently they are. A lot of people have this issue, and every Tom, Dick and Harry would say, you know, you should try this, you should try that, and you sort of scratch your head at the end of the day and you kind of quickly figure out that a lot of this stuff isn't actually that helpful. But, you know, there's some really smart guys out there that actually do have really good advice. So I'm not trying to discourage you from checking that out. In fact, you know, go out there, do your own research and homework and see what you can find. In my opinion, just don't go crazy. And it's really that simple with the settings. So, you know, in order to avoid this inflation to sort of happen, let's just hit Control Z again to sort of undo that. We'll hit our noise button and let's just play around with our curve editor. You know, this is a bit too excessive for me anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and sort of, you know, make that a little bit more subtle. And let's play around with my scaling. And this is kind of like a cast iron look right now. And if we apply the noise to the mesh now, you could barely see any difference, and you could actually get really big chunks in there as well if you're clever enough to figure out how to use this curve editor in order to work for you rather than against you. So you know, that's another technique that we can apply. Let's close this down. Actually, let's undo this and let's close this down, and let's have a look at some of the other techniques that we may have available to us. Just really quickly before we get into all the other stuff, and I'll show you different brushes and stuff like that that we could actually apply to create really cool surfaces. I forgot to mention a few little details in surfaces. Let's just head back into here, and by the way, you can actually apply the noise surface over on this piece of geometry over and over again. By that I mean if I hit apply and I apply this sort of, you know, deformation, click on noise again, and then play around with, say for instance, my scale and get it, you know, a little bit chunkier. I could apply that again and really create really unique shapes and styles and all sorts of really cool things. Another thing that I almost forgot to mention is that you actually have color stuff here. So, you know, we got a slider, and it's mostly to the right. And if I click on that, and I could select a, say for instance, a blue, like so. There's your color. Or, you know, select something here. I prefer the sky blue. I'm going to click on that, and you can sort of start to see that it starts to appear in there, and you can play around with your settings and to your little heart's content, as I like to say, and you know, add all this extra little detail. And then you've got another one over here, and you could click on that that one and make that a green or a yellow. Yellow's a good color. We'll click on that, and you could slide this little bar across to the yellow side of things and sort of yellows it up. And but you know what, if I hit apply, you won't actually get anything, even if your RGB and stuff like that's switched on. Reason being is I need to head into Polypaint and click on colorize. Once I click on colorize, then I can hit apply, and it actually works. If I don't hit colorize, let's just undo that and turn on noise again. If I don't hit colorize and hit apply, as you can see, it's switched off, we don't get the color in there. So just keep that in mind, and you know, helpful little tip. So I'll just close this back down, hit Control Z, and let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so far you've seen a few little cool tips and tricks in regards to how to apply, you know, deformation all over a piece of geometry or mesh. Now, what happens if you actually want to apply noise to a specific part? Well, for that we actually have a brush. Now I'm just going to go into brushes and hit N, and I've got noise right here. Click on that, and you'll notice when I click and drag onto our geometry, it sort of creates this, you know, noise, but it's not really the sort of noise we're after. It kind of reminds me of the noise that we saw in deformation when we used the noise bar there. But lucky enough, there's actually settings for that. So I'm just going to open this up, and I'm going to go to brushes, and I'm going to grab this little round circle with this arrow in it, and I'm just going to click and drag that here into our sidebar, and I'm going to hit surface. and that opens up our little drop down, and it's very similar to the surface settings that we have here, except this actually controls the brush, which is super awesome. So you've seen how I applied this. Now I'm going to up the scale to something like 108, and I'm going to apply it again, and you can sort of see what's happening there. Now in regards to the actual strength, it's set to 1. We can control the strength up here. We can either sub or add. Intensity set to 9. We can turn that all the way up to 100 and see what happens. And that's pretty hard. So it kind of destroys all of our detail of the actual grenade itself. So we don't want that, but I just wanted to show you some of the options that you have available to you. So obviously you will turn this back down to 10%, and we've got our curve editor on here, and we can play around with that the same way we played around with our curve editor in our surface drop down on this side. And of course you have the same thing, color and all that available too. So essentially it's pretty cool. You could do quite a lot with that. And in fact, what I might actually do is, while I'm at it, I'll go to transform and I'll hit activate symmetry, and I'll make sure my radial symmetry is switched on. I'll make sure that my radial count's set to 8, and we're on the Z-axis. So sort of get this, and we can sort of apply that deformation all around the object if we want. I'm noticing that it's not as strong on this side as it is on this side, and just having a look here, yeah, it's not centered on the canvas. So in order to combat this, I'm just going to go to transform. Actually, you know what? I'll undo this first. Get all that detail off, and then I'll go to transform, and I'm just going to hit S pivot, and that fixes it. Sort of moves it up into this sort of what do you call it? It's the word I'm looking for. The fuse assembly. Hit X, and let's just adjust that ever so slightly, like so, and that'll do. Okay, so now I fix that, and if I hit X again and apply it all over the place on this side, it comes out just as much on that side. So there we go. Alrighty, so now that we've got that there, what else do we have available to us? Well, we have other brushes available, and if we click on here and we have a look, we've got our flakes brush, which is kind of interesting. Actually, this is a good brush for damage. I found if I set this to sub rather than add and kind of sort of scroll around a bit, kind of almost creates a damaged like look. So it's almost like a bullet hit this and almost chopped a hole into it. And that's good for metal. Actually, you can use it for other things as well. You don't have to use the dots here. You could use a freehand or the spray, and you get different effects. So I implore you to check that out. We've got planks, which is an interesting one again. If we apply this to the actual body, you could sort of see what it does, and you notice it's got this red sort of like line that follows my brush around, and that's caused by something called the lazy mouse, and it makes it kind of easy for me to sort of sculpt on an object. It's kind of like having a bit of bungee cord, sort of drag your brush around. It sort of makes my lines a lot smoother whenever I need to create lines and cuts and nooks and all those sorts of things. And the way I turn that off is hit L, but if you want to explore that a little more, just head into stroke, and you get lazy mouse right here, and you could click on that and you can play around with your settings. And if you want more information, simply hold down Control, and that brings up more information. Anyway, so I've turned my my lazy mouse off, and the way I can do this is sort of, you can sort of see what it does. Adds these kind of planks. I go to sub again, and we could create damage all over again. You mix it up with the other brushes, and you could really create some pretty cool effects. So there you go. Once again, if you set it to really light, say for instance 8 or 9, and you hit X in order to turn on your radial symmetry, you could sort of create these pretty cool effects. It kind of looks like old skin or leather or whatever you want. And if you apply it correctly, it could even look like little scratches in your metal if it's subtle enough. So and we're not constrained to the brushes just inside our brush palette. In fact, if we hit on Lightbox and we go to brushes in here and we open that up, there's a whole plethora of stuff. I mean, we've got variations of the noise brush. We've got noise 1 all the way through to noise 4. We've got, you know, different fracture brushes, and, you know, we've got scales of fish, and, you know, lizard scales, and stitches, and a whole bunch of really cool stuff in here that I definitely, you know, I'm asking you guys, just go out there and check this stuff out, because it's pretty awesome. And then on top of that, there's plenty of resources on, of course, the ZBrush website. And yeah, so anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and close Lightbox down. And that covers it for this part. Let's move on to the next section. Okay, the final bit that I want to cover is a little bit more old school, so I'm just going to close this down, and I'm going to go select standard, and I'm going to grab our drag rect, and I'm going to go to alpha, and I'm going to go to import, and over here we have a bunch of different material textures. This is what we're going to be using for painting a little later on, but I also wanted to show that we can click on any of these material textures, double click on that, this blue one for instance, and it turns it into a grayscale image, which is pretty cool. So basically, you know, understands that it's got color in it and turns it into a grayscale image, and that means we can then hit X and turn off our radial symmetry and click and drag that onto our piece of geometry, and we could really start to get some deformation happening, which I really like. The only drawback with that is for one, I don't really like the fact that we've got add switched on. I'd rather have those scratches and all that sort of stuff pointing in, so I'll hit sub for that. And to be completely honest, it's a bit too strong, so we'll drop that down to about 10 and apply that again. And that's a little bit more subtle, and this is the way I would actually approach it. Now, we've got all these other tools available to us, which are great, and don't get me wrong, are super cool, but you know, I'm a little old school in regards to the way I like to texture things and add detail in, and I would probably go in here with a brush and sort of chop bits into it manually. We've got little bits here that we could sort of drag, rect our thing over and sort of cover that up. The only problem with that is if you'll notice that that when I applied the actual texture, or the alpha, now that it's an alpha, to one side, it actually came out on the other side, and when it came out on the other side, it's kind of extruding outwards, whereas on this side it's pushing inwards. And that's because basically what happens is that when I apply it to this side, it sort of pushes the geometry on this side out, which is not what you want all the time. In fact, it could get a little troublesome in some cases. There is an actual workaround in regards to that, so I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo this, and now it's nice and clean. And the way we actually combat this, I should say, is if I head into brushes. At least I think it's in brushes. Actually, let's open this up, and I'm going to close down surface, and from memory I suspect it should be in auto masking. And yep, backface right here. Click on that, and now when we apply our deformation, it actually only applies it to one side. So let's zoom that out again, and I'm gonna click and drag that on like that. I know it's really thick and you can really see it on this side, and we spin it around, yep, and it's gone. So it doesn't affect the opposite end, which is exactly what we want. Then we could go in here and sort of apply our drag rect over every surface that we want. And you know, if you're finding that it's a little clunky, I've noticed that I think my lazy mouse is switched on again. Just hit L in order to turn that off, and usually it speeds up your sculpting. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers us for detailing on the actual model. I'm going to cover some tips and tricks in regards to how we go about painting this, and we'll look into things like the different materials we have available to us, and the obviously the RGB and the mRGB, which is material and this together. So it's those two creating that. Anyway, so let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and reset our actual grenade in order to remove all the detail on here. And we're going to start off with changing the material that we're using. I don't think this red wax is really going to help us see what's going on with some of the textures that we apply, so I just switch that out to another material and head to basic material for instance. You can actually choose any other material that you like, but basic's a good starting point for us. And we're going to make sure that when we head into subtools that our actual cast iron body is selected, and there it is right there. And then we're just going to go and select a texture. Click on textures and head into import. And over here I've got a bunch of textures available for you. And if you're wondering how to get these textures, just head over to the Bad King website if you're viewing this on Vimeo or YouTube or whatever. And just download them and apply them to our texture palette like we have with this one. Anyway, so now that we've got our texture in here, let's go over to color and hit fill object. And it's a pretty easy way to sort of get a texture onto our cast iron body really quickly. But just looking at this right now, it looks kind of unrealistic with, it's very smooth. It's done a pretty good job sort of covering this grenade up. Admittedly, we've got a seam right here that we could fix later on, but it's not bad, and it's a pretty good start. So how do we get a little bit more detail in here using this texture? Well, we can simply head into masking. And down the bottom in masking, once we've opened that up, is mask by saturation. And we click on that, and you notice that our actual body's gone a little dark. So if we head into our subtools again, and we see this little brush right here, click on that, and that actually turns off the texture that we got applied, and we can see our mask being applied. Now all these darkened areas, and you can sort of see how you got all these bits and pieces right here. And this is where the fun begins, because now when we head into deformation, and we click on that, we open that up and head all the way down to inflate, and say for instance type in 20, we could really get some detail happening from the mask that we grabbed from our texture. And now when we clear our mask and head back to our subtools, and we turn on that little brush again in order to turn that texture back on, you can sort of see that it looks much better. And of course, once we get shadows and all those sorts of things happening, we can really make this thing look really realistic. So here's one technique that we could actually apply and actually utilize. So yeah. So now that we've applied our texture to our cast iron body using our fancy little fill object trick like this one here, let's go ahead and put a texture on the safety lever right here. So let's just make sure our safety lever is selected by clicking on it. And once we've done that, let's head over to textures again, and this time let's import a blue texture. So double click on that, bring that in, and let's go over to color and fill object. Once we've clicked on it, you may have noticed that absolutely nothing happens, which is a little bit of a mystery. So why would it work on this actual cast iron body, yet it doesn't seem to work on this safety lever? Well, I decided to investigate this, and here's what I managed to find. If you remember back to our very first tutorial, we ended up using a unified skin in order to create this safety lever. So remember how we started off with this sort of object? And I'm just going to turn on polyframes. We started off with this object, and I was really worried about this pinching here. So what I ended up doing is, going down to a unified skin, which is right here, and playing around with my unified skin settings and hitting make skin unified. And then I went off and appended the unified skin, and I brought in this object. And as you can see, we don't have the pinching on the top. And I thought that was a great idea at the time. And it's all nice and smooth, and I ended up masking out our safety lever. And then with that mask, I hit extract, and I extracted this piece of geometry. Apparently, in what I managed to find is that for some reason, ZBrush doesn't like actually doing a fill texture on unified skin objects. And which, say for instance, we select this object, and it's pretty low res, so expect the texture to be kind of like pixelated. But if we head over to color right now and hit fill object, it works just fine. So there we go. Like I said, it's pixelated, but it gives you kind of a rough example in regards to what I mean. And then I head over to this unified skin, which I created, once again, from this object right here. And I do the exact same thing, make sure my blue texture is selected, and just go to color and hit fill object. Once again, nothing happens. And that seems to translate to this extraction. So there's there's a very interesting little conundrum that was solved right there. So just keep that in mind when dealing with ZBrush. Okay, so this sort of leaves us with a question in regards to what to do next. Well, there's actually a pretty easy way to sort of go around applying the sort of selected texture to this, and we could just easily select our drag rect, and let's just have a look. I've got symmetry switched on. I'm going to switch that off, and I'm just going to go ahead and just simply click and drag. And actually I've got add switched on, and I need to switch on RGB, so I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to switch add off and turn on RGB. And RGB is basically our color channel, and it's just going to add all the color and not the add deformations here. So I'm just going to click and drag that. There we go. You can sort of see what's going on, and once again it's going through the opposite end, and we've got all this kind of like smudging happening right here, which is not what we want. Now remember how we talked about actually using the backface button? Well, I'm just going to go ahead, hit Control and undo that, and I'm going to go back into brushes and sort of click and drag that over here, and then go to auto masking and turn on backface backface auto mask, and click on that. And now when we click, and actually, you know what, I'm going to make my focal shift a little sharper. So I'm just going to click and drag onto that, like so. And look at this. No, we don't have that issue anymore. And we can go on the other side. We can click on that, and we can click here, and then we can click here, and then of course we can click here. And this is pretty neat. It's simple and it's very, very effective. And the thing that I like about it most of all is the fact that it doesn't affect the inside. So it kind of looks like it's kind of painted on as you would with a real object. And we could go in there and change that into a different color if we like. So that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and undo that again, and let's switch what's it called, backface masking off, or backface auto mask off. And let's use sort of like the old school method. I might as well show you, and this is the way I would usually combat a situation like this before I discovered the remarkable properties of the backface auto mask settings right there. And what I would used to do is I would hold down Control, and then I'll select the curve tool right here, and I'll click on symmetry, and then I'll click and drag this out, and I'll use the spacebar to move that about. And once I've got the bit selected that I want, I would double click Alt, and that gives me a really sharp setting like that. So it sort of makes it really nice and sharp. I'll move up to this point, and then I'll click Alt again, and this time it's softer, and I'll let go, and it masks basically this area out, and this area out, and then I'll click on it a few times in order to soften it, and then I'll go ahead and apply my my drag rect with a texture like that and like that. Actually, you know what, I should turn off symmetry when doing this, so I'm just going to undo this, and this time I've got symmetry turned off, and apply that again, and apply that again. And you know what, it's not the best way, it's actually not the best method at all, but it's still effective. And sometimes you may not have the option of turning on backface every now and then. You may have to do it like this. So I'm just going to invert the mask now and apply it to this side. And the same with this side. And there we go, it sort of pushes through the other end. And you got to choose your battles sometimes. It's Sometimes you're dealt certain things, and that's just the way it has to be. So yeah, that's a very simple way of applying your texture to your grenade. Before we finalize part 2 of this tutorial and move into part 3, there's one last feature that I wanted to show you guys regarding painting, and that is Spotlight. So if we head over to our textures, and the way we actually activate Spotlight is simply by hitting this button. And because it's already on and it's already pressed, you may have noticed that nothing's actually happening. Well, in order for Spotlight to work, we actually need to load in a texture. So we could choose any of these textures, but I'm going to go ahead and import my own. And I'm going to grab my green metal texture right here, double click on that. And once that's in our texture palette, let's head over to this button right here, Add to Spotlight. Once we click on that, you'll notice that two things have happened, and that is we've actually got our metal green texture right here, which is part of our Spotlight, and our lightbox has opened up as well. And the reason the lightbox has opened up is that ZBrush is basically telling you that we could go over to, say for instance, our materials, textures is what I actually meant to say, and basically double click on any of these and actually add it to the Spotlight. So we could then toggle between any of these textures that we've actually got in here, or we could go ahead and sort of import our own into in Spotlight. But let's not worry about that too much. This is just sort of like a brief rundown in regards to what Spotlight actually is. So I'm just going to hit hide. And you'll notice that we actually have this widget sitting on our texture and sitting on top of our grenade. And what this widget is basically kind of like your settings. And it kind of allows you to get in there and change things about, like the size, for instance. We could scale this up and down. We could also get in here and play around with the rotation. And we could also actually manipulate a lot of really cool stuff. Like we got our, I won't get into the smudge just yet. It's a little impertinent. It's not really related to what we're doing. We got contrast, which is pretty cool. So we could sort of like up the contrast of our texture. And in here we've got other features like saturation, and could make it really green and really bright, or we could make it monochromatic and black and white like this. So I'm just going to set it back to the way it was, which I think it was here. And then you could play with your brightness settings and all those sorts of things. So I implore you to go in there and sort of check this out. But what I wanted to actually show you is how we actually move this widget about. So you notice that it's got this kind of like an orange circle in the center. If we click on that circle and drag it, it actually moves our widget about. If we click in anywhere outside this orange circle, as long as we're within this outer radius, so anywhere within inside here, we could actually move our texture around. And this comes in really handy because it allows us to actually, once we hit Z, it makes our widget disappear. And we can actually paint right through this right now. Now at the moment I've got Add switched on. I haven't got RGB switched on. And if I got Add switched on, it doesn't actually paint, but it sort of paints through and distorts and warps our object. And if I hit Shift Z in order to turn Spotlight off, you can sort of see what it's done. Admittedly, it's painted through the alpha and or the texture, or the whatever you want to call it. And we've got this great detail on here, but it's obviously destroyed our geometry. But we just simply switch out to a different brush and we could pretty much solve that problem, play with our intensity settings and whatnot. So I'm just going to hit Control and undo that, and Shift Z in order to turn Spotlight back on. And what we can do is position our model where we want it to be, and let's put it over here. And that way we only get this scratch and stuff like that. And we just turn off Add and go over to RGB and switch that on. Now when we click and drag on our actual model, you'll notice that we actually paint through our texture. And if we hit Shift Z in order to turn Spotlight off, you can sort of see what it's done. And it's just painted right through onto our geometry, which is a really cool feature that I really like. So we could hit Shift Z in order to turn that on again. If you're finding it a little bit hard to see through this, hit Z in order to get your widget back and your settings. And you could get in here and you could actually play with things like your opacity. And we can turn the opacity up on our texture, or we can turn it down and make it almost invisible. but just enough for us to sort of see through this. So let's hit Z again in order to start painting. Oh, by the way, in order to paint, you actually need to turn this widget off, and the way you do that is by hitting Z. So once it's disappeared, that means we could actually paint. So let's go ahead and just turn our grenade around, and let's just paint through our texture again. You can sort of see that it's not actually affecting the opacity of the actual paint itself. It's only affecting the opacity of, you know, this texture sitting on top of our grenade. So when we hit Shift Z again in order to turn Spotlight off, we could see that that it's really clean, and there's almost no difference. We've got a little bit of smudging, and it kind of looks kind of like a little pixelated and low detail, and that's not really the texture itself. In fact, we're using a pretty high texture. We're using a 2048 by 2048, which is more than enough for a model like this. What I recommend is, you know, if you got a model around about, you know, 1.5 million like this one here, you know, a 1024 by 1024 is more than enough to sort of get that detail in there, and that's the way you'll probably get it. If you want more detail, I'll show you really quickly how to get that. So I'm just going to go ahead and just sort of zoom that back out and put it back here. Hit Shift Z again in order to turn on Spotlight, and then Z. And one last thing before we actually show you how to get real sort of like nice detail inside this piece of geometry is this function right here, and this is the Spotlight radius. And this is absolutely amazing. I absolutely love this, because when I move this about and I click and drag on it, you'll notice that I'm getting this sort of circle that's opening up in the background here. Let me show you again. It's really big, you can sort of see that, and then it gets really small. And this is basically controlling the size of our paintbrush. When that's actually activated and switched on, meaning that you could actually see, you know, a radius, and we hit Z, you can actually see what's going on. You can paint that right on, and you don't have to deal with that whole texture that's usually sitting right on top of the whole thing, and you just sort of, you know, apply it to where you need it. And, you know, we could hit Z again and make that a bit smaller. If you make it too small, you actually end up turning it off, and when you hit Z, your texture remains. So keep that in mind. If you want to turn it off, just go all the way to the opposite side of anti-clockwise, I should say. And if you want to turn it on, just go clockwise, I guess. And let's make it about this big, which is more than enough. And there we go. That's pretty cool. And we can sort of paint that detail on there. But if we zoom in, I'm still not happy with what I'm seeing here. You know, I'm sort of painting this stuff on, and, you know, my brush size is really small and stuff like that, but it kind of looks a bit smudgy to me. And that's because the subdivisions of our actual piece of geometry are set to really, really low. So if we have a look, and it's set to 1.4, almost 1.5 million, I really should be looking at the active points, which is 500,000 for the cast iron body. Anyway, if we go into geometry right here, and, you know, we've got our 4th subdivision, and we double click on that and make it maybe the 5th or perhaps the 6th subdivision, and it's a bit sluggish now, but I want to show you the difference between using kind of 4th subdivision and a higher subdivision like 6. Go in here and we paint this, and you could already see there actually is a vast difference, at least to me anyway. I don't know if you guys can see this on video. Like I said, if you're viewing this on Vimeo, you should have a HD button, or if you're viewing this on YouTube. My YouTube videos are usually sort of cut down. YouTube kind of restricts the amount of content you could actually upload. So there we go. And you could have a look at this sort of detail versus this detail right here. I mean, it's completely different. And we can, I'm going to make my brush size a bit bigger, and I'm just going to paint this on like that. And when we zoom out, it looks so much better. It looks so much more realistic, and I'm really happy with that. And once again, if you want to get that detail in here and make this thing look really, really cool, we actually have the option of going to masking. And I'm just going to find that. Where is that? Let's close geometry down. We don't need that anymore. And masking's right here. And let's just head back into Mask by Saturation. Click on that. Our model would have darkened. And we head into our Subtool palette and turn off the little brush here, just so we can see our actual mask. I'm going to invert this. And I'm going to head back into Deformation. And over here, I'm going to type in minus 14. And there we go. And when I clear our mask, you can sort of see all that detail sort of translate onto here. And it's really fine, as you can see. And of course, you know, you have to get in there and really clean it up and make it look nice and pretty and that sort of stuff. But this is a really easy way of getting like fine detail in here. We turn our brush back on and you can sort of see the difference. Of course, you know, I'm not going to go ahead and, you know, in this tutorial and show you how I would actually approach this. We'll cover that in part 3. So there you go. A few very helpful tips in regards to how to get Spotlight up and running. Once again, just a quick recap before we go. Shift Z actually turns Spotlight on, and Shift Z also turns it off again. And if you actually want to see your settings, which is that little widget, you hit Z and that brings that up. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and yeah. Okay, so in part 3 of this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and we're going to play around with the way I would actually approach detailing and painting this model, and you guys can follow along and sort of maybe you'll pick up a few useful little tips and tricks that I would utilize. And another thing that I wanted to cover in this tutorial but didn't are materials. And what we'll do in part 3 is we'll head over to our materials palette and we'll play around with some of the materials that we have available to us, and we'll try to figure out which ones are going to work on our grenade and which ones won't. And so then we'll go over to BPR render right here, and which is best preview render. And we'll get our shadows and our ambient occlusion and our mask layers, and we'll composite it all together inside Photoshop and make it look really cool, and get the final sort of image done. So what I want you to do, if you're not already on the Bad King website, is head over to there and find this tutorial, and or even part 3 of this tutorial. And I should actually provide you with a link for all the textures that I used in here. And if you're interested, go ahead. It's a free download. And yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and catch you on the next one. Cheers.